Today's daf we're going to be learning is Gittin, daf Kaf Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by the Billets, Cohens, and Hararis in loving memory of their dear friend Tova Ryan on her yurts. We're going to get started with going back to the Mishna on Kaf Bet Amud Bet. Maybe I'll even start for one quick minute with the Mishna before this, okay? Because I want you to understand when we get to the end of the sugya, we're going to talk about it as a continuum. The Mishnah before, if you remember, said, Ein kotvim b'mechubar lakarka. You cannot write on something attached to the ground. And then it said, but if you did, it's okay, as long as you signed it when it was detached. So the obvious answer, the obvious explanation is this is Rabbi Meir, who holds only the signing is important. But we then had an explanation that maybe when it says sign, it doesn't really mean sign. It says write the Torah part, the important part of the get, whereas you can't write even the form of the get when it's detached, because maybe you'll end up writing the important part, right? But then the focus is on what needs to be done when it's detached, even the writing part. And then it would be Rabbi Elazar. So we saw two ways of reading that Mishnah, whether it held like Rabbi Meir or whether it held like Rabbi Elazar. Just to remind you who's what, and I want you to remember this for later, we had three rabbis, Shmuel, Rabbi Yoshaya, and Rabbi Yochanan, who all thought that Mishnah was Rabbi Elazar against the simple reading. And only one, Rish Lakish, thought that it was Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to get to our Mishnah. So the next Mishnah, because again, we're reading it, it was a page apart, but in the Mishnah, it's all one continuum. Hakol ksherin lichtov et get. Anyone can write a get. Afilu cheresh shotev katan. Even someone who's a deaf mute, someone who's not of sound mind, and a minor. Haisha kotevet gita, she can write her own get. Haish kotevet shoparo, he can write his own receipt. That was a different issue. But then there's also this line, she'ein kiyuma get el b'chotamav. Now, ein kiyuma get el b'chotamav seems to imply, both parts of this Mishnah really seem to imply Rabbi Meir. Because Rabbi Meir, if you hold the writing is not important, then the writing can be done by a minor or anybody else that's not generally considered with knowledge halachically. And the last line, Ein kiyuma get el b'chotamav, seems to be very clear Rabbi Meir, because all you need are the signatures. That's what's really important in the get. So that the simple reading, before we get to anything in the Gemara, really seems to indicate Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Meir, both the previous and this Mishnah. But then you get to the Gemara, and the Gemara seems to think that there's a problem here. The Gemara says, but they're la b'nei de'aninu. They don't have knowledge. So how could they write a get, which makes it sound like, and how can they write it, meaning, how can they write it lishma? Now, Rabbi Meir doesn't need get lishma. So the Gemara seems to be going somewhat according to Rabbi Elazar. To which Amar Rav Huna v'hu shaya gadol omer gabah. It only works, saw this yesterday, only works if there's an adult supervising. What does the adult supervision help for? So according to Rashi, what does the adult do? First Rashi on the daf. Omer lo k'tov litzorech ploni. They tell you, okay, the adult is standing there saying, make sure you know the get is for this guy standing right in front of you. Now that's something pretty simple, even someone who's not really understanding of things. Here it shows the lishma doesn't need real understanding. It just has to be designated for this person. That's not something that requires real intellectual capabilities. And Rashi continues to say what's kind of obvious. Dikasaval Rav Huna matnitim Rabbi Elazar debai ktiva lishma. Seems like unique ktiva lishma. The seifa, now what's the problem? The seifa dekamal ein kiyuma get el b'chotamav. How do you explain that? You only need the signatures. That's not Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar doesn't think you only need the signatures. Rabbi Elazar thinks you need the Edei Mesirah, the ones who watch the get being given. Okay, I just want to review again, because I assume most of you have this, but in case you don't, I don't want to ever make assumptions. The connection between Edei Mesirah, Edei Chatima to Tiva Lishma and Chatima Lishma is a bit of a jump. It's not such a complicated jump, but it is a jump. So I want to go through that again. If the Eidim, let's start with Rabbi Meir. The Eidim that are important are the ones who sign. Then when the Torah says Vikatav la, he writes for her Vinatan, and then he gives it biyada, he gives it to her in her hand. Then the Ktiva is obviously not Vikatav, it's Vichatam, because he doesn't think the writing is what's important. When it means he writes her a get, it means he gets the get signed, which is actually, even though Katav doesn't mean signed, it really makes sense that it means sign here, because what does it mean to write a get if not to sign it? So he understands to write as to sign. But if you don't think Edei Chatima Karte, then you could just read the Vikatav in its simple, obvious, the simple reading of Vikatav is really, and you write her, which means the writing has to be Lishma. So Rabbi Elazar, because he doesn't have to reinterpret Vikatav as Vichatam, it's signed, therefore he's left with the simple reading of written, and then it means it has to be written Lishma. So that's the connection between Ede Masira to Ktiva Lishma, just so that's clear. So now, how do you read Ein Kiyum Aged Ela B'Chotamav? What he means is, Hainu Ede Masira. He really means the Kiyum Aged is by the ones who pass it. Well, why did it say then Chotamav, the ones who sign? Because Rashi says, Rov Gittin Nitzirim B'Fnei HaChotmim. Most people, they sign the get, and they're the witnesses who also witness the giving of the get. That's usually what happens. So when it said Chotamav, it really meant the ones who pass it. So that's the way Rashi understands Rav Huna, in which case we're going to have, by the way, 3 answers to this question of how could the Cheresh Shoteva Katan be kasher for a get if they're not B'nei De'ah. So the first answer is Rav Huna, according to Rashi, and we're going to compare it to Tosfot in a minute, even though we don't usually go in depth. This is a very interesting Tosfot and very basic, and I want to learn it with you for a minute. But before we get Tosfot, I want to get Rashi clear. According to Rav Huna, okay? According to Rav Huna, you need a Gadol Omed Agabad to make sure it's written Lishma, and that's Rabbi Elazar. And why is it Rabbi Elazar? Because it's clear here, the Ktiva has to be written Lishma. That's what you need the supervision for. And that's why you even asked the question. And therefore, it makes sense it's Rabbi Elazar. Comes Tosfot. It's very long Tosfot. That's why yesterday's daf was very short, because it's a super long Tosfot on the words V'hala b'nei de'anim. Okay, so if you look back at yesterday's daf, somewhere toward like the second third, the beginning of the second third of Tosfot, okay, you might not find it. I'll just read you one line from here. Od Omer Rabbeinu Yitzchak, that you could explain this sugya aliba de Rabbi Meir. Okay, even the question, but they don't have knowledge, could also be asked according to Rabbi Meir, and the answer of Rav Huna could be explained according to Rabbi Meir. How so? According to Rabbi Meir, if the ktiva is not important, you don't need ktiva lishma. Why would you need adult supervision? He says a very important line. This is why I want to read it. Sal kadatach the Rabbi Meir nami beinan ktiva lishma midrabanan. He said that even though Rabbi Meir says it's all about the signatures and you don't need ktiva lishma, that's only on a Torah level. On a rabbinic level, you need ktiva lishma also, which is interesting in light of the fact that we're going to see later that Rabbi Elazar, who only required ktiva lishma and only requires Eidei Mesira, in the end, we're going to see there's a Mishna that the Eidim sign on the get mipnei tikkun haolam. And he's going to say that you need Eidei Chatima also. It's not like you can live without them on a Dirabanan level. So we end up, according to Tosfot, not everybody agrees with this, but according to Tosfot, Rabbeinu Yitzchak in Tosfot, just like Rabbi Elazar in the end needs both, also Rabbi Meir needs both. And that this Mishnah then, Rav Huna could be saying, and then it explains why it's actually a different approach. Since it's only rabbinic, and the Tosfot goes on to say this, I'm not going to read it. Since it's only rabbinic, we can allow adult supervision, because he points out that in other issues, we don't allow adult supervision. For example, chalitza. Chalitza, we don't allow a katan to do chalitza with a gadol omed agaba. So if that's a Torah law, and this is a Torah law, well, why wouldn't you have it go in both? So therefore, he says it's not a Torah law, it's rabbinic, and that's Rabbi Meir. Okay, so he has an advantaged approach, because Rabbi Elazar, if we say according to the way Rashi explains it, we have to explain what's the difference between chalitza and this, and why does it work here and it doesn't work in chalitza. And obviously, one could try to come up with answers. Anyway, it's a very interesting machlok at Rashi Tosfot. We're going to move on. Amalei Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman now takes issue. This sugya is not exactly the most organized sugya. We're going to actually have 3 answers, but the second answer is going to be a little bit of a hidden answer. Like it's not going to be clear that he's addressing our question, but it will come out in the end with an answer to the question, how do we allow cheresh shoteva katan if they're not b'nei de'anim? And then only later, after we finish dealing with Rav Nachman, who's the second answer, only like a while down the sugya, we'll get to our third answer. And there's a little bit of a debate about, because it's a non-normally structured sugya, there's a little bit of a debate about whether this is actually the way to read the sugya, and there really are 3 answers. But I'm going to go with, there are 3 answers, and we're going to go through the 3 answers as we go through. So now Rav Nachman says to him, Elameata, Amarle Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says to Rav Huna, Elameata, according to what you're saying, if it's just that somebody needs to tell you who it's written for, so we can have a Gentile do it. Now notice a Gentile is not written in the Mishna. Okay, so why don't we have a Gentile do it? And if you want to say a Gentile can do it, because no one ever said they can't, Hatanya, it says in a braita, pasul. It says somewhere else in a braita, it didn't mention Ovei Kochavim in our Mishna, but it does mention them in a braita, and it says they're disqualified. So why, if basically, according to what you're saying, as long as you have adult supervision, we can make sure the lishma is done properly, so why wouldn't it work with an Ovei Kochavim? So the answer is, Ovei Kochavim l'date denafshe abed. It says, it's a child or a cheresh shoteh katan, that category is like a blank slate. They don't have knowledge. So if you come and you say, we're doing the get for this person, you're basically filling in their lack of knowledge with, you're giving them the knowledge they need to do it. But a Gentile has his own opinion. So you might tell him, go. It's not like they don't have da'at. They just have other issues, which is they're not in the world of Gittin and Kiddushin, right? This isn't a mitzvah that if they go get married to their neighbor, their Gentile neighbor, they don't do a get or Kiddushin. It's not what they do. So they have their own mind, which means that they could theoretically think about somebody else. You're telling them this get is for this person. They might think about some other person with the same name, and therefore you can't be sure that it's some Mishma. That's why a Gentile doesn't work. But after Rav Nachman said this, Rav Nachman changed his mind. Hadran Rav Nachman, lav milti da'amri. When I questioned you, Rav Huna, I actually was wrong about my question. Right? So it's important to admit you made a mistake. And he says, now you might see if you have the study guide at the top of the daf, I put the next Mishna, because the next Mishna, even though I started this year with going back to the previous Mishna, so the next Mishna is about hakol ksherim lahaviyat haget. Who can bring a get? Our Mishnah was about who can write the get. Now, who can bring it? Who can be a messenger? And it says there, everyone is kasher, except for chutzmi, and look who's listed, cheresh, shoteh, katan, v'suma, v'ovei kochavim. Other than our three, so they can write the get, but they can't bring the get. And now who else is listed? A suma and an ovei kochavim, a blind person and a Gentile. Now, what does he say? So now let's read again. Midika pasile lovei kochavim liyanavah. The next Mishnah said ovei kochavim cannot bring a get. But notice he's missing in our Mishnah. What does that seem to imply? Michlal delinyan ktiva kasher. Our Mishnah didn't say anyone was disqualified. It sounds like they can write a get. So his whole question on Rav Huna was, well, if you're going to say that you have adult supervision, why doesn't adult supervision work with a Gentile? And we know it doesn't. Well, actually, who says we know it doesn't? It actually works because it's not mentioned in the next Mishnah. It said they're disqualified. It didn't say they're disqualified by us. So it must be he can do it. To which the Gemara now asks against him, but didn't you just quote a braita about Tanya, Ovei Kochavim Pasul? It says no, Ovei Kochavim can't write again. So in a braita. So how do you reconcile that? Very simply, and here we're going to get to, by his answer, it's going to be clear what he thinks about our Mishnah and how he responds to the original question. That Mishnah that said Ovei Kochavim Pasul, Rabbi Elazar, he damar edi mesira karte ubina ktiva lishma, meaning that Mishnah that says they were disqualified is because, again, unique ktiva lishma according to Rabbi Elazar. That means an Ovei Kochavim is not in the world of ktiva lishma, but our Mishnah, which says hakol ksherim l'chtov et haget, which seems to imply even a Gentile and obviously a katan cheresh and shoteh, you don't even need adult supervision according to him. Why? Because it's Rabbi Meir. You don't even need ktiva lishma, so anybody can write again. So second explanation is, right again, first explanation was either it's Rabbi Elazar, right, or it's Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir actually requires ktiva lishma mid Rabbanan. But let's just stick with Rashi's simple reading to make things easier, which is, the first opinion is, our Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar, unique ktiva lishma, and that's why you need a gadol, omer al gabav. You need adult supervision to make sure the lishma is done. According to Rav Nachman, no, this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, and now we read it simply, right? The Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Again, the previous Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, because remember, however we read the previous Mishnah, we're going to read this Mishnah. So Rav Huna, let's say, will probably read the previous Mishnah as it's Rabbi Elazar. And it means don't write the tofes, because maybe you'll write the torah. As long as the torah is written when it's attached, though, it's okay. And then our Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar again. But Rav Nachman says, no, this Mishnah is Rabbi Meir, which is anyone can write a get because the writing of the get is not important. All that's important is at the end of our Mishnah, En kiyum haget ela b'chotamav. It's just the ones who sign it. And that's the simple reading without getting complicated like Rashi is, which is, the ones who sign are probably the ones who witness the giving of the get, and that would resolve it. Okay, now, before we get to answer number 3, Okay, it's funny because we already have Rabbi Elazar and we have Rabbi Meir. What's going to be answer number 3? We'll get to it. But right now we're going to go off on a bit of a tangent where Rav Nachman's going to talk about Rabbi Meir's opinion, since he's already saying our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. So I'm Rav Nachman. Since Rabbi Meir doesn't require lishma, ktiva lishma, so much so that Omer Haya Rabbi Meir was known to have said, afilu mitzao ba'ashpa, if you find a get in the garbage, a man was planning to divorce his wife, and it's got everything written out, and you pick it up out of that garbage, and you're the man, it happens to be your name, it happens to be the same name as your wife, and you want to give it to her, you can do that, as long as what? You just have to sign, right? Get witnesses to sign, and as long as the signatures were done, the Shema, you're good to go, right? That makes sense, according to Rabbi Meir. Now we're going to have 3 sources that are going to contradict, that Rav is going to say, but how could you possibly say this? Look at this source. How could you say you could take it out of the garbage? What do you mean? V'katav la lishma. There's a braita that says, based on the pasuk v'katav la, we've seen this a million times, la, it means lishma, it needs to be written lishma. So what's he going to answer? Obviously, remember, what does Rabbi Meir say? Anytime it says ktiva, it really means chatima, the signature. My love ktiva, to get that braita, it wasn't talking about the writing. Chatimat edim, they were talking about the signatures has to be lishma. Second question, Eitivei Rabbi, I put these 3 on the chart on the page. Any get that's written not for the name of this woman is pasul. That seems against Rabbi Meir. Right, the written, right? Just again, every time it says writing, what it really means is signing. Eitivei, third question. And here it's more confusing, because it's hard to say ktiva means chatima, because listen, they're talking about 2 writings. Yeshu kotvo, ilu kotvo lishma. First of all, it's a little bit hard to understand. When he writes it, it's as if he writes it lishma. What does that mean? So they're going to assume, my love, does this not mean Yeshu kotvo litoref lishma, when you fill in the name of the people, the important part of the get, as long as you did that lishma, ki ilu kotvo litopes lishma. It's as if you wrote, there have to be 2 kinds of writings. So what's the 2 kinds of writings? The topos and the torah. If you wrote the torah lishma, the important parts of the get, then it's as if you wrote the form stuff lishma, meaning you can, if you're a sofer, you can have all these blank gets in your possession. You can write them all, not lishma. As long as you fill in the torah lishma, the name of the people, the place, the date, then it's as if you wrote the whole thing lishma. That works. That's the way they understand that source, which again seems to imply against Rabbi Meir. To which Rabbi Meir can answer, says Rav Nachman, lo, kishu chotmo lishma, ki'ilu kotvo lishma. When you sign it lishma, it's as if you wrote it lishma, meaning all you really need is the sign. And that's, again, one ktiva really meant ktiva, they're writing, and one of them meant to sign. Now that was 3 different answers to these 3 sources, but there's a much simpler way to answer, which you might have been thinking about on your own. We're bringing braita to contradict Rabbi Meir, but it never said this is Rabbi Meir's opinion. So the obvious answer is Ibayit Ema, Hani Matzniatamane, Rabbi Elazar, Damar Edim Sira Karte. You could just simply say all those braitot match the Tanaitic opinion of Rabbi Elazar. You can't bring a Tanaitic source against a Tana when there's another Tana that disagrees with him, because he could just simply say, all those Tanaitic sources you quoted are not my opinion. So therefore, right, we weren't questioning Rabbi Meir, but we were questioning Rabbi Nachman's interpretation of Rabbi Meir. And basically, Rabbi Nachman can say, all those sources for Rabbi Elazar don't bring questions on the way I understand Rabbi Meir. What did Rav Nachman add to Rabbi Meir? He didn't really add anything. He just clarified that he really doesn't need ktiva lishma at all, that you could even pull it out of a garbage and sign it, and it's fine. Okay, which, by the way, this weakens, obviously, Rabbeinu Yitzchak's argument that he does require it on a rabbinic level, right? It weakens that whole claim, because it really looks like he doesn't need ktiva lishma at all. It could just be that Rav Nachman feels it's that way, and Rabbeinu Yitzchak is saying maybe there's some other Amora who would hold that about. Anyway, that, Rav Huna would understand it differently. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Okay, now you have to remember where we're up to. Now, finally, we're going back to the original question. Peresh Shoteva Katam work. Why? Aren't they not b'nei de'ah? Answer number 1, let's just go with Rashi. The whole Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar, you nik tiva lishma, but you have an adult standing overhead making sure it's done lishma. Answer number 2, It's all Rabbi Meir. You don't need writing Lishma. You don't need an adult. You don't need anything because the writing is not important. Answer number 3, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now I said, how could it be different? Well, it's going to be missing a few words, okay? A few very important words. When it says, Cheresh Shotev Katan can write a get, what it means is, they can write the get, but only the tofes. They can't write the important parts of the get that have to be written lishma. And then you would have to say, right? Well, let's just see one more minute. He said the same thing. And then who does it follow? That unique tiva lishma, which means the Rabbi Elazar. Okay, it must be Rabbi Elazar. Now, this is Rabbi Yehuda saying in the name of Shmuel and Rav Chaga saying in the name of Ula. The Rabbi Zreika Amar Rabbi Yochanan Eina Torah. But comes Rabbi Zreika, by the way, just to pay attention, Shmuel says it's Rabbi Elazar. And what did Shmuel say about the previous Mishnah? It's Rabbi Elazar. Remember, he was on the side of the 3 that said the Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar. That works fine and good. But who else said it's Rabbi Elazar, the previous Mishnah? Rabbi Yochanan. Now, here comes in the name of Rabbi Bar Chana, said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, the previous Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar. Comes Rabbi Zreika and says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Eina Torah, this isn't true, what he just said. I don't buy it. Ma Eina Torah, what does that mean? Like, why is it not? Amar Rabbi Abba, kan hodiacha she'en koach lishma. Our Mishnah is clearly telling us that you do not need lishma. What bigger proof do you need that tiva lishma is not important, if not our Mishnah? That's clearly what our Mishnah is saying, which means what? Rabbi Meir. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Damar ede chatima karte. To which the Gemara is going to obviously say, V'ha'ama Rabba Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. But what did we see on Daf Pap Aleph Amud Bet at the bottom? The Rabba Bar Chana said the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The previous Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar. So how could you say that Mishnah is Rabbi Elazar and we immediately go into Rabbi Meir? That Mishnah said you have to write Lishma, and this Mishnah says you don't need Lishma at all. That makes absolutely no sense. To which they're going to answer, the obvious Gemara answer here, there's an Emoraitic dispute between Rabbi Zreika and Rabbi Bar Chana, what Rabbi Yochanan held. Did he read these Mishnahs as this is Rabbi Meir's approach, or did he read the Mishnahs as Rabbi Elazar? So don't say it's a contradiction because Rabbi Yochanan said that there, Rabbi Yochanan says this here. It's 2 different Amoraim quoting Rabbi Yochanan, who each had different opinions about what they heard Rabbi Yochanan say or what they thought Rabbi Yochanan's opinion was. So we have a debate about what Rabbi Yochanan really held about these Mishnah. So 3 different ways to understand our Mishnah. Now we're moving on to the next one. Everyone can bring a get. This seems to be talking, by the way, about shlichut leholacha, right? Lahaviyat to get, the one who's the husband sends a messenger to bring the get. It doesn't seem to be talking about shliach lekabbalah. Whole debate about whether shliach kabbalah is the same or not the same. Shliach kabbalah is when the woman sends someone to have received the get for her. And later we'll see a sugya about that. It's unclear. There's a debate among the commentaries whether it would be the same or not. But everyone is kasher to bring a get other than chutz mi cheresh shoteh v'katan v'suma v'ovei kochavim. Okay. Now, kibel hakatan v'higdil. Cheresh v'nitpakeach, suma v'nitpateach, shota v'nishtapa, ovei kochavim v'nitkayer pasul. What if the husband appointed them to be a shaliach when they were in the status of disqualified? But then the katan became a gadol. The Gentile converted. The blind person was able to see. He was cured. The deaf mute was able to now speak and hear. So the shoteh wasn't of sound mind, now is. So what if that happened? Still doesn't work. Why? Because when the husband appoints them to be a shaliach, they can't be a shaliach. It doesn't work. Even if later they're capable, it's at the moment he appoints them that's important. Avav, but what? What if, classic Mishnah example, pikach v'nitcharesh v'chazar v'nitpakach. He could see fine, or here we're talking, right, this is the scene. He went deaf. First he could hear and speak, then he became deaf, mute, then he got back to hearing and speaking. So at the moment he was appointed a shaliach, he was fine. In the middle, on the way, something happened. And then by the end, he was fine when he came to deliver it. So again, it's pikach v'nitcharesh v'chazar v'nitpakach. So he was fine and then became deaf, mute, and then was back again to being fine. Patuach v'nistameh v'chazar v'nitpatech, or became blind and then back, right? Was fine and then blind and then back. Shafui v'nishtata v'chazar v'nishtapa. He was not of sound mind. First he was, then he wasn't, then he was. Kasher, this all works. Zaklal, here's the rule. Kasher. As long as at the beginning and at the end you have knowledge, you're good. Okay? Now, the Gemara starts off and says, notice, by the way, we'll get back to this, but the word dat is not relevant to one of the characters here. To who? The blind person. The blind person has dat. It's just they can't see. Okay? That's different from Cheresho Teva Katan, which are considered not to have dat at all. Okay, but we'll get back to it. So now they're going to say, we understand why the Cheresho Teva Katan can't be a shaliach. To be a shaliach, you have to have knowledge and understanding. A Gentile, well, a Gentile can't release his wife through divorce. So therefore, he can't be a shaliach to do divorce. You have to be able to do the action to be able to do it for somebody else. But what's wrong with a blind person? Why can't a blind person bring it? We're going to have two answers, and interestingly enough, by blind rabbis. Okay, so here goes. I'm Rav Sheshet. By the way, these two rabbis, Rav Sheshet and Rav Yosef, often talk when they're sugyot about blind people. Look, blind people we can't see. We don't know for sure who we're getting it from, and we don't know for sure who we're giving it to. So it's a problem since we can't see who we're giving it to. Can't see who we're getting it from. How do we know that this is for sure the get for this man and for this woman, right? A messenger has to know where they're going and what they're doing and who they're getting it from. And Rav Yosef says, what are you talking about? Not true at all. And if you're going to say that, says a great line. How could a blind person ever sleep with his wife? As you know, maybe she's someone else. Right? Remember, like the story of Yaakov and Leah and all that, right? And it's, how does he know who he's sleeping with? So, how could any man sleep with his wife at night? Because it's dark. In those days, it was dark at night. They didn't really use candles so much in the bedroom. And therefore, right, they didn't have any lights. Therefore, how could anyone ever sleep with their wife and not be worried that maybe it's somebody else? So what does he answer? The obvious answer. They recognize the voice. You could say all sorts of things. They recognize the smell. There's all sorts of ways to recognize people without seeing them. And such says Rav Yosef, the blind person. Right? Interestingly, Rav Sheshet didn't think this. So now, El Amar Rav Yosef, he said, what's the reason why a blind person can't bring a get? He says it's very obvious. This Mishna is talking about bringing a get from abroad. What do you have to say when you bring a get from abroad? Bifanai nechtav, in front of me it was written. I saw it being written. Bifanai nechtam, I saw it being signed. So a blind person cannot say, I saw it being written, I saw it being signed. So because of that, he can't bring a get. And then that would mean that he could bring a get if it was in Israel. Okay? Well, then, according to you, let's say it all matters that you're able to see at the time of the giving of the get, the writing of the get. So if you were not blind yet, and then you became blind on the way to bringing the get, but you actually did see b'fanai nechtav, it sounds like it should work, right? Logically, that would say yes. But what does the Mishna say? It's not what the Mishna says. It says he has to be that he saw at the time of the writing of the get, and he saw at the time of the giving of the get, even if in between something happened, it doesn't matter. But he has to have his sight when he delivers the get. So chazar v'nitpatech in, lo chazar v'nitpatech lo. It sounds like if he didn't his sight didn't return to him, then he can't deliver it. But that doesn't make sense according to what you're saying, Rav Yosef, because all we care about is he could say b'fanai nechtav, and b'fanai nechtav, even if now he's blind. To which the Gemara answers, actually, read the Mishnah that way. It would work even if he couldn't see later. So why did it say v'chazar v'nitpatech, and then he could see again? Well, it's only because of all the other examples. Obviously, if you're not of sound mind, you can't bring the get to the woman because you don't have your intellectual capabilities to actually be the one to give it to her. So in that case, it's tama de chazar v'nishtafa. Halo chazar v'nishtafa lo. Would it work if your intellectual capabilities didn't return to you? That's why, just because it was with all these other examples, it said tananami patuach v'nistameh v'chazar v'nitpatech. But really, it doesn't matter. You could, if you had your sight at the time, and then you became blind, you could actually deliver the get, even if your vision didn't return. Amar Rav Ashi, Daikanami Dikatani says, I can further infer this from the Mishnah, and this is what I mentioned to you at the beginning. Zaklal, where it says this is the rule. You have to have the beginning and the end with da'at. Now remember, the summa does have da'at. They have intellectual capabilities, they just can't see. So lo katane if it wanted to say that the summa has to be have his sight when he's done, then it should have said whoever is kasher to bring the get has to have kashrut, because with the summa the issue is just he's not kasher, he's not right, he can't do it, but not because he doesn't have da'at. So basically, because it didn't use the word kashrut and it said da'at, that actually includes that the summa, who is still blind when he delivers it, as long as he wasn't blind when it was written, can actually do it. Shema mina. New section. Rabbi Ami. Eved ma'ush yaseh shaliach lekabel get isha miya ba'ala. What about a Canaanite slave? Notice they're not mentioned in the Mishnah. So as usual, we're going to have a machloket because he's not mentioned. The question is, what do we do? Amalahu. So the first answer is from Rabbi Ami himself, who was asked the question. Michlal de Eved kasher. Turning now to Amud Bet. Since they disqualified Oved Kochavim and they didn't say Eved, because remember, an Eved is kind of part of the Jewish household and has all mitzvot upon him, except for ones that are time-bound. So it sounds like an Eved would be kasher. Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, but now Rav Asi quotes Rabbi Yochanan saying the opposite. Ein ha'eved na'aseh shaliach lekabel get li'isha miya ba'ala. Why can't an Eved do it? Well, I did say the Eved's part of mitzvah, but what is an Eved not part of? She'eno b'torah kiddushin, Gittin b'kiddushin. They can't get married and divorced. Remember, an Eved can be with a shibchat Caananite, with a Caananite slave. But there's no laws of, they don't do kiddushin, they don't do Gittin, they don't have any of these laws. So therefore, it makes sense that he wouldn't be allowed to do this, just like the Gentile, we said, doesn't do it because he's not part of this. It includes a Gentile who happens to be living as a Caananite slave in somebody's house, or a Gentile slave. Right? They always call them Caananite slaves. It doesn't mean they're only from Canaan. So anyway, basically we have this machloket, and we're now going to have a question of Rabbi Elazar on the explanation that Rabbi Yochanan gives. Rabbi Yochanan says the reason an Eved can't do it is because he's not part of Gittin and Kiddushin. But Matkifla Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, what are you trying to say? Tama b'milta delete, ha b'milta d'it kasher. You're trying to say someone who's not part of a particular halacha, those halachot don't apply to them, they can't be a messenger for that. Now, oh, by the way, I forgot to point out, here it's a little bit tricky because we talked about shaliach laholacha in the Mishnah, about being a shaliach to bring the get, and this question is actually lekabel get, which is a totally different thing. This is being in place of the woman to accept the get. So Rashi says that, well, since, and then we're learning it from our Mishnah, which is about holacha. So for those who differentiate, it's a little bit more complicated to understand how this study works. But basically, Rashi says that since, right, Eved Knani can't do shaliach l'halacha, we assume he also can't do shaliach l'kabbalah, and then we can infer from there, though, that an Eved Knani is not part of that, right? The Gentile can't. The Eved Knani is not part of that, so he must be able to. It's a bit of a jump because we started with halacha, we moved to Kabbalah. Again, if we were learning this sugya much more in depth, we would try to analyze this a lot better and try to get into understanding it better. But we're going to just take it at face value right now that they seem to be equating them. So now he says the following: if you're not part of something, then you can't be a messenger for that. And if you are part of something, then you can be a messenger for it. That's what seems to be implied. Well, I'm going to bring a question to that theory because I'm going to prove to you something that Gentiles are not a part of. Are a part of if they're doing it on their own, but can't be a messenger for Jews for it. Okay? And then that basically knocks out the logic that Rabbi Yochanan said, which is since they can't marry and divorce, therefore they can't be a shaliach for it. So now he says the following. Let's take a Gentile or a kuti. They actually can take trumot and maslot if they want on their own. What does that mean? If they decide to give a gift to the Kohen from their that produce they give to the Kohen has the status of truma. It's effective. Okay, it's not just, oh, they gave a gift. But this gift is called truma, which has all sorts of, right, a zar can't eat it. There's all sorts of halachic ramifications. So that means it's effective. And yet, what are we going to see? They can't be a shaliach for a Jew to do this. Utnan, oved kochavim shetaram shel Yisrael. Afilu birishut, even if he did it, I told this Gentile, please take truma masra from my produce. Ain't truma to truma. It's not effective. So here you see, right? Now he says, continues his argument. My time. What's the reason? Lav mishum dichtiv atem gam atem. Now, we learn a lot of laws of shlichut from this pasuk. It says, Kaim tarimu gam atem. So you should take the, tarimu is taking the truma, also you. Why also you? What do we learn from this? Just like you, gam atem, ma atem Yisrael, af shluchechem Yisrael. We learn laws of shlichut from here. That anyone who's like you, because it says also you, so anyone who's like you can do it. And that's why Gentiles are excluded. And therefore, Avadim Knanim should be excluded as well. I don't disagree with you, Rabbi Yochanan, though, Avdei Kochavim can't be a shaliach to get a get, but I disagree with you about your reason. You say the reason is because they're not part of laws of Gittin and Kiddushin, and which sounds like if they were, they would, but it's not true, because even if they were, they can't from Truma. And what's the real reason they can't be shlichim? Because of this drasha gamatem, they have to be just like you. And they're not like you because they're not part of the world of Torah mitzvot. So now you can already maybe guess what the answer is going to be, right? And this is why he says, this is why an Eved Kochavim can't do it because of gamatem, because they're not Jews. Well, Amrit Abaye Rabbi Yana, lo. What do you mean? That pasuk is excluding Gentiles. It's not excluding Avdei Kochavim, because ma'atem b'nei brit, afluchachem b'nei brit. What is similar about a Jew? You're part of the brit. You had a brit milah, whether you did or didn't if you're a woman, but you're part of the brit of mitzvot. These Avdei Kochavim also have mitzvot upon them. So they're not excluded from gamatem. So the only reason why you would exclude an Avdei Kochavim from Gittin and Kiddushin to be a messenger is because they don't do it themselves. So Rabbi Yochanan basically, kind of answers the question against him. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to have another statement very similar to Rabbi Yochanan. The problem is this statement is going to have two parts to it. The first part is exactly what we saw before, but it's somebody else quoting Rabbi Yochanan is saying it. Before it was Rav Ami quoting Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to see the same statement, but then we're going to go off on a total tangent about his second statement. And we're going to try to understand what he's saying, and then we'll get to the next Mishna already. So the rest of this is really not connected. An Eved can't become a shaliach kabbalah to accept the get on the behalf of the woman. That was an exact repeat of what we quoted Rabbi Yochanan saying before. Someone else quoted him as saying this also. Now, we were talking about getting a get. Now we're going to talk about getting an emancipation document. This is a very confusing line. What is this? Even though we learned, which we don't know what that means. If someone says, you are my shipcha, meaning I'm not freeing you, but vladech ben cholim, but I'm freeing your vlad. Okay, we're going to see she's pregnant, and I'm freeing your offspring. Normally, the offspring would be yours also. If she was pregnant when he said these words, zachtalo, she could actually accept the get shechur on behalf of her child. What's the chiddush here? Well, what does that mean? When Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda came, he explained this to us. So this is a little bit confusing. Rabbi Yochanan tartam. So first of all, he said two things. One was the first statement about the Eved, and then the second was about this shipcha. So what does it mean? He says, this is the way I understand it to mean. This is a basic law. In Eved, if we are both slaves to the same owner, and he gives me a get for you, he says, you be a messenger to accept the get on, this is why it's similar, because if someone's accepting a get on behalf of another, it's an Eved, accepting for another Eved. What's the problem? I am, right? I acquire your freedom to then pass on to you, right? I don't become free. But in order to acquire my freedom, what happened? Your freedom. When anything I acquire, you remember, Yad Eved ki Yad Adon, goes right back to my master. So basically, I've done nothing. So if my master gives me an emancipation document for another slave that he owns, and I get it for them, he doesn't go free. Now, if I get my own emancipation document, Rashi says this, and it comes up in the Gemara all the time, which is Gito v'yado ba'im ke'echad. I can acquire it because at the moment I acquire it, I got my freedom. So then I have my own yad. Okay, I don't have my own yad as long as I'm a slave. But if I get my own emancipation document, my freedom comes at the same moment and I can actually acquire it. But if I'm acquiring it for someone else and I'm staying a slave, I can't do that because I don't acquire my freedom for myself. So I'm not a free person, which means my Whatever I acquire goes right back to the master. But I can acquire a get if a different, let's say I'm owned by you and our friend is owned by somebody else, and that their master gives me an emancipation document for them, I can do that because it's as long as you give the, just like my master could acquire it on their behalf, it's just someone acquiring it as a messenger. So just like my master can, I can also, because what's the difference if it goes to my master? It's still somebody else. That's what it's saying here. Okay, that's the first thing you need to know. Eved mekabel get lechavero miyad barbo. Okay, I can get a get for my friend from the master of their master, but shel chavero miyad barbo shel chavero, but not miyad barbo shelo, but not from my own master. Ve'im chasha adam lomar zo halacha shnuya, and if someone says this is the halacha, im hayta ubara zachta lo, okay, that if she was an ubar, she would be able. Now here's tricky. Me and my ubar, my fetus, are both belonging to my master. So theoretically, if he wants to give me freedom for my fetus without giving freedom for me, that shouldn't work. Because as soon as he gives it to me, it goes right back to my master and he's the master of it. So why does this work? So in Morlo, if somebody wants to say, how could this, doesn't make any sense? And Morlo Shnei Gedolei Ador Pershuat Hadabar. Explain to them the two Gedolei Ador explained this. Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yitzchak. Okay, they both explain this. One said, Hamani, okay, now one said and one said usually means they disagree. Here it just means one said the first part and then the other built on that one. Hamani Rebbe, this much match Rebbe, who held. Someone who frees half a slave, it works. Let's say I have a master and he said, listen, you're going to be free Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You're going to work for me Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I can acquire half my freedom. That works. So likewise, and I saw Gita, you wrote this in the chat a while ago, Baruch Shekivant, my time of the Rebbe Bahas. So then why does Rebbe's thing work? Kasavar, he holds, now there's actually a machloket about this, but he holds on this side of the machloket. It's a fascinating debate. We're at the end of class, so we don't really have time to talk about this, but we'll talk about it when it comes up in other sugyot. Ubar yerech imohu. The ubar is not considered a separate entity. It's not like we're two slaves owned by the same master. It's just considered part of my body. And therefore, it's just like if someone frees me partially, it works. So it's basically like freeing part of me. Okay, so now we're going to get to the next Mishna. So that was a total aside. We got off on about slaves and particularly maidservants because they're pregnant. We're going back to yevama. Women who are not believed to say someone's husband died. Who's not believed? Right? Remember, we're very open to including almost anybody in testifying that somebody died. We accept one witness, we accept women, we accept all people that aren't normally accepted in order to allow a woman to get remarried. She thinks her husband's dead to prevent agunot. Well, the women who are not ne'emanot to say me ba'ala, ne'emanot lahaviet gita, they can actually bring their get. Okay, meaning all these women who aren't believed. Who's not believed? Sarah, okay, we have chamota, the mother-in-law, bat chamota, the daughter of the mother-in-law, which means the sister-in-law, right? The sister of her husband. Sarata, the rival wife. Yivimta, someone who was married to her husband's brother and now fell to yibum to her husband. So she's potentially going to be a rival wife. And bat ba'ala, the daughter of her husband from a previous marriage. These are all women that don't necessarily have a bad relationship with her, but could possibly have a bad relationship with her and may want to ruin her life. Now, what's the best way to ruin a woman's life? Well, and also get her far away from their connection to this man, right? Either the husband of the rival wife, right? Or the mother-in-law, they want to get her out of the picture. So what do? They claim he's dead. She goes and gets remarried. Then the husband shows up because he really wasn't dead. And then they have to get divorced from both. They can't be married to the first. They can't be married to the second. That's the law. They were really a married woman. When they married someone else, it's a problem. So they can really ruin her life. But they can actually bring her get, which is weird because it's also doing the same thing. Why aren't we worried? Because she has a document in hand. So that's her proof. A woman can bring her own get, just like a woman can testify her husband's dead. But if she brings it from abroad, she has to say also. So now the Gemara is going to bring a contradiction to our mission. It says the exact opposite. The Hadran, it says in a braita, they're not believed in the get either. So we're going to have Rav Yosef and Abaye who each answer the same type of answer. We're going to distinguish Israel and abroad. And again, Israel means it was written in Israel. Abroad means it was written abroad and brought to Israel. but they're each going to distinguish in the opposite way. So how so? Rabbi Yosef, Amar Rav Yosef lo kasha, kam ba'aretz, kam b'chutz la'aretz. Ba'aretz delav adibur adida kasamchinan. In Israel, we don't rely on what she said because all she does is bring a get. She doesn't say b'fanei neftav. There's no testimony. So there we'll believe her because all she does is bring a written document. Then we'll rely on her, mehemna. But b'chutz la'aretz, adibur adida kasamchinan la mehemna. But in chutz la'aretz, she has to say b'fanei neftav, then we're worried maybe she's lying. Amarle Abaye, Adraba. Abaye says the exact opposite. I think it's the opposite. In Israel, you don't need to say panei neftam. That means that no one ever goes to court to validate the get, which means what? The husband can actually come and complain. We're not worried if he comes and complains because we'll try to find the signatures and all that. But it means that there's room for the husband to complain. If there's room for the husband to complain, then theoretically, maybe the husband, in the end, maybe they won't prove that, maybe they'll be able to knock the get out, in which case the woman actually has a chance to ruin the woman's life because the husband could potentially come and claim this isn't a get. So therefore, there is a chance that she's really trying to ruin her life. Lo mehemna, we don't believe her. But b'chutz la'aretz, since she's going to come to court and say, b'fanei neftam, and the court's going to give it a stamp of approval, this is a get. Husband is no longer allowed to come and complain. That was the whole point. It's brought from Israel, from abroad to Israel. We don't want anyone complaining later. We'll have no way to verify if it's good. So in that case, if the husband's going to come and complain, they won't believe him. That's why we'll believe these women. So even though they're testifying, right, but because they're doing it and they're saying the get is a good get, once it's done deal, it's a done deal. There's no way to undo it, which means they have no ulterior motive because they'll never get anywhere by the get will never be able to be undone and ruin the woman's life. So because of that, we believe. Okay, that's the end for today. We'll get to a braita that supports Abaye, but that almost nothing of it in today's stuff really supports it. So we'll just start from there tomorrow. Quick review. We have everyone can bring a get even cheresh katan. How could that be if they don't have dat? We gave 3 different explanations and it kind of matched. Is it Rabbi Meir? Is it Rabbi Elazar, the Mishna? We connected it to the previous Mishna. Then we went to culture in Lavia Taged, and then we dealt a lot with the Summa. Why is the Summa a little bit different than everybody else? And what's the problem with the Summa? We have Rav Yosef and Sheshet, the 2 blind rabbis, talking about it. Then we had this question about an Eved. Could he be a shaliach to accept a woman's get? And then from there we got off about Avadim. We had this aside about the woman who's pregnant. And then we got to the women who aren't believed when it comes to say the husband's dead, but are they believed when it comes to get? Contradiction between 2 braita and 2 different resolutions between Abaye and Rav Yosef. Which one is in Israel and which one is in outside of Israel, and what's the logic behind each one. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a great day.